Well, this is All About Politics, news, debate and opinion from the heart of Westminster, and things already moving on the subject of Brexit. As you know, a crucial, meaningful vote was due tomorrow, if defeated, followed by votes on leaving without a deal and also delaying leaving. Now, the news this morning reported by Tom Newton-Dunn, the political editor of The Sun, he says the Prime Minister is currently meeting with senior aides in Number 10 to plot a way through this week's carnage. He says it is most likely she will decide to change tomorrow's vote from a meaningful one to a provisional one. Well, joining me now to discuss that are the star of LBC, CNN and various other things, Ian Dale, a supporter of Brexit, Tom Baldwin, Director of Communications for the People's Vote campaign, who wants another vote, and Jill Rutter, Programme Director at the Institute for Government. Welcome to you all. Let's talk about this news. Is it the right thing to delay this vote, do you think, Ian Dale?
I think it's highly embarrassing if that is what they're going to do. The Prime Minister promised a meaningful vote, promised at the dispatch box, and that's not something...
She did that before. Yeah.
Well, she did do it before, but you can't keep kicking the can down the road when you've only got 18 days to go until we leave the EU. This government, I'm afraid, is becoming a laughingstock, not just in this country, but internationally.
I should say you say that as a former Tory activist.
Yeah, I do. And look, I'm somebody who, when Theresa May became Prime Minister, I thought, well, she was the right woman for the job at the time. But I'm afraid that she can't keep kicking the can down the road. She's running out of road. And what are we supposed to do? Have a vote 2 or 3 days before we leave the EU? What will that achieve?
That's what I think will happen. But do you think it's right to delay it?
Look, the problem she's got is not that sort of she can't sort of run the government or can't negotiate a brilliant deal. It's that there isn't a brilliant deal to be negotiated. There's a fundamental flaw in the premise of Brexit.
She has already agreed a deal.
Yeah, but it's been rejected by the House of Commons. It's going to be rejected again. And the problem is this, is you can't find a form of Brexit that meets all the promises made in 2016, which doesn't make us poorer, or which provides any clarity or closure for the future. Now, in those circumstances, when clearly what's being offered is not what was promised, or not any good, you've got to hand it back to people. It's not her fault, it's Brexit.
I mean, in the circumstances facing a likely defeat, was it the right thing to do, to delay this?
I agree with Ian. I think she should have gone ahead and done it, not least because she sent lots of ministers out yesterday confirming that the Prime Minister was a woman of her word and would do it, so they might be feeling slightly...
we don't know as yet.
Slightly let down if she goes with that. But I think the interesting question actually this week is less on that vote because, as people were all speculating, it's highly unlikely that that was going to go through unless there's some fascinating news from Brussels that is really why they're all meeting Downing Street and Tom's got it completely wrong. But absent that, the really interesting question is, does Parliament now start to assert itself any more than it has done? It's always threatened, but not quite got there. So do we actually have those MPs who are saying Parliament needs to take control of the proceedings, that there is a majority for a different sort of Brexit in Parliament? Do they actually start crystallising it? Do Tom's People's voters actually ever come out from under the parapet rather than wait until absolutely the last minute to try and do that? So I think what's really interesting to observe is what does everybody else do? And in particular as well, we heard when the Prime Minister kicked the can to this week, there were people threatening to resign if she didn't take no deal off the table, didn't ask for a delay. So what do those ministers who are strongly saying we actually have to take no deal off the table, we have to ask for a delay, what do they do if the Prime Minister appears to be not making any progress at all this week?
Ian Dale, I mean, isn't the problem the division in the Conservative Party? And after all, the Prime Minister reached a deal in December in line with the manifesto, and yet a large number of her party won't support it.
Well, it wasn't in line with the manifesto. That's the basic
problem.
It
was.
No, it wasn't.
It was leaving the customs union.
Well,
it was leaving the single market.
It's not leaving the customs union. That's the problem. That is the problem that we have with the Irish backstop. You're perpetually in the customs union, potentially. Yeah. And that's why...
But the Irish backstop, as you know, is provisional. And,
well,
everyone says it's indeterminate. But beside the point, the leader of the party agreed to it.
Indeed, but the leader of the party is the leader of the party. She is primus inter pares in the cabinet. She is not a dictator.
Well, the cabinet agreed to it, except for those who resigned.
Well, exactly.
But the majority of the cabinet agreed to it, and yet there's not the discipline in the Tory party to support it.
I wonder now whether the cabinet is finally about to assert itself, because as far as I can see, she's got two supporters in her cabinet now, Chris Grayling and Karen Bradley, two ministers unlikely to be a member of future governments. Now, when you're a Prime Minister in that position, it is up to the Cabinet
She's got
to
Michael
take
Gove
control.
supporting her.
Well, look, they're going to say they support her outwardly because that's what Cabinet Ministers do. But when they sit around that Cabinet
Michael
table...
Gove says, look, this is a compromise which takes us out of the European Union, and yet a minority of the Tory party somehow can't reconcile
I'm
themselves
somebody
to
who,
that.
when this deal was announced, I said I'd rather stay in than support this deal. But in the end, if you believe that getting out of the EU is the main thing and you want to get out on the 29th of March, I'm afraid there is no alternative but to support it at the moment. But unfortunately, people in the ERG do not take that point of view, and they are risking Brexit altogether, because if we don't leave on the 29th of March, this chap here is going to have wind in his sails.
Yeah, but the problem he's got is that the Labour Party, in their manifesto in 2017, backed Brexit and backed coming out of those institutions which have now become the issue.
Yeah, and in the 2018 conference, they made it very clear, and of course, losing parties are not bound by their manifesto. It's an important point to remember. They've got a new policy, which was agreed unanimously at conference, which was to examine all the options if they can't get a general election, including a people's vote. They're now moving towards the position of backing a people's vote. So, look, I mean, I think what we're seeing here is...
Why don't they put down an amendment this week to do that? The reason they won't put down an amendment so Parliament can back a people's vote is because they know there's no majority in Parliament for a people's vote.
The problem with this, Ian, is that there isn't really a majority for anything in Parliament at the moment.
But you accept that there isn't for a people's vote?
But well, there shouldn't be at the moment.
Well, Peter Carr was sitting here earlier, he just says now's not the moment.
Yeah, exactly.
He also says he's not part of the People's Vote campaign.
Peter's got a compromise proposal, which I think, in the right circumstances, could prevail. But it's really important to how you sort of see the people's vote. It's not an option in this Brexit chaos. It's not up there with like the Prime Minister's deal and no deal and Norway plus and Canada minus whatever. We're the solution to this crisis. We're the grown-up solution. You either go off the edge of the cliff, or when you've looked at all these Brexit proposals, worked out whether you want a hard Brexit or soft Brexit, whether you want, what's the point or what's the cost, at that point you can say, well, I think it's only fair to put it.
I mean, as I understand it, and you are saying in the circumstances you would be happy to see a no-deal exit in 18 days' time. Is that right?
It doesn't frighten me. I wouldn't advocate a no-deal Brexit, but we are where we are. We are 18 days away, and to my mind, leaving on the 29th is very important, because if we leave on the 29th, I'm afraid Tom becomes unemployed.
What does it mean if we leave on the 29th without a deal, from the best assessment of the Institute for Government?
It potentially means a lot of disruption. The government's got contingency plans in place. A lot of people are saying that's scaremongering. Actually, contingency plans mean you think about the worst that could happen to try and make sure you can manage it. So hopefully there are plans in place to manage it. Some things will depend on what the EU does. The EU have actually put in place one or two sort of unilateral measures so far on things like aviation to make sure the planes don't stop flying, to make sure financial markets still function. We might see more of that. I think the EU...
I mean, compared to where we are, would it be in the national interest to do it?
It's difficult to say that leaving the EU with no deal is in the national interest, given that it would inevitably inflict disruption. A lot of businesses sitting there, and actually the government a couple of weeks ago produced under duress its no deal assessment, which was quite a big blame game. It's saying businesses and people have done a really bad job of getting ready for no deal, which actually I don't think you can blame people and businesses. I think that lays pretty foursquare at the government for making sure we're not.
If this no deal
ready.
vote goes ahead on Wednesday, how will the Prime Minister vote in that? Because I haven't got a clue how she
Well,
would
presumably
vote.
it won't go ahead if there isn't a meaningful vote, because it was all contingent on a meaningful vote.
If it does, in theory, she ought to support the no-deal motion, because that is the law at the moment, the law which her own government passed.
Well, I think it's quite interesting, because if people get wind of the fact the Prime Minister's not going to schedule these further votes, then I think you'll get a whole raft of amendments down to whatever is tabled tomorrow, and I thought it would be very likely, if the people don't think they're going to get their bite at taking no deal off the table on Wednesday, that there will be a motion there. So I don't think just saying the Wednesday vote won't happen means the Prime Minister may not have to make her mind up
all
on
these
no
ministers
deal.
on the spot.
And from the point of view of good government, do you at the Institute for Government think another referendum would be a good idea?
I think we're not near there yet. I think there's some very interesting questions about another referendum, not least what the alternative option is. Remain is relatively easy. I think it's really interesting to say, can you actually take a sort of hard Brexit off the ballot? Can you put Theresa May's deal on the ballot when it was so resoundingly rejected? So I think there are quite a lot of problems in doing another referendum, and it takes a long time to get a good referendum up and running.
Yeah, and I don't think...
What would your question be?
Well, I think if it's the Peter Kyle, Phil Wilson amendment, you've got a proposal there which is the Prime Minister...
No deal's off the table, that's the point.
Well, that's one of the attractions of their proposal.
But let me just
then
it
make
would
the
be a
point.
rigged referendum.
Yes.
What you have to have, if there is a referendum, you have to have Leave versus Remain. If Leave wins, deal or no deal.
Well, this is ultimately for MPs to decide. But what we do know for sure is when you put a specific form of Brexit up in front of the British people, they hate it, and we would win by a large margin, I believe. And that's why no more unicorns. Let's have a specific form of Brexit. Let MPs decide on.
Thank you all very much indeed.